there's nothing inevitable about the march of technology. This is never linear, it's never completely predictable. We have some hubris, we have some very optimistic, far-fetched ideas about how good this is going to be. The march of AI is going to be unpredictable. It cannot be as optimistic as what people are seeing so far. Maps, search engines, everything that we do moving around the physical world now is infused with information. The next step is going to be what happens when what we want to do is purely digital? What happens with our activities when they're purely online? And these are not going to be simple digitisation of what we normally do. I mean, cyberspace itself is going to be a new space. It's going to be constructed digitally. We're going to interact with it digitally. Everything we do is infused with information. The products that we're going to exercise in the new digital economy are brand new information products. They're going to be constructed digitally. They're going to be imagined digitally. And the laws and the regulations and almost the intuitions that we apply to these things to start thinking about them, that's all new.
Do we have a lot of catching up to do with technology?
Yeah, we do need to catch up. A lot of the innovation that we're about to see is innovation in regulations, and I don't think that that's an oxymoron. I don't think that we should be stilted in our understanding of regulations and jurisprudence. I think that we need to be quite positive. Jurisprudence is really like a contest of ideas. It's like an arena in which human rights ultimately plays out. I like to draw the analogy to the early black gold rush in the 1800s, the 1850s. We, Western civilization, discovered this raw material, crude oil, and we started to burn it, and we know where that's led. But the more important thing about crude oil is that it is the raw material that gets broken down and reconstructed, and it forms almost everything that we do in the established economy. Now, information is going to be the same. What happened with the black gold rush was that a whole lot of new laws and regulations had to be formed in order to reset the balance of human rights and commercial rights and free enterprise. In the days of the black gold rush, it was not uncommon for pioneers and entrepreneurs to be barging their way through landholders and invading people's properties and helping themselves to these riches underneath the ground. Now, we're seeing the same thing playing out now. We're seeing an incredible rush, a gold rush for information in the digital economy. There is data everywhere, and there is an intuition, I think a false intuition on the part of entrepreneurs and pioneers that this data that's out there in the public domain is theirs for the keeping, just like the old gold rush people used to invade properties and help themselves. Now, we're going to see a contest of ideas. We're going to see human rights playing out in the public arena, where people are going to quite rightly assert their rights and assert their interests, assert their human rights around the data that's being exploited almost behind their back. And I think that in the next 10, 15 years, we're going to see new laws and new regulations and new ways of thinking about how do we balance commercial rights and commercial gain versus the rights of the individuals affected by these digital innovations.
Do people today even understand that that's happening?
People today have got almost no idea. The most powerful people in the world want to tell us that in the digital age we're all quite sophisticated. We know that there's no such thing as a free lunch. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the free economy. I love the incredible tools and resources that are being made ostensibly for free. And I've got a fair sense that there's a bargain going on. There's a bargain for my raw data. My personal information is being traded off for the riches and these free dividends. I don't think the majority of people understand this. I think that the typical user has got a rough idea, but I don't think they have any idea in detail about how information is flowing behind their backs. You know, the cleverest people in the world are being employed by digital information companies not to cure cancer, but to figure out ways of data mining and data refining. And today they're basically selling us ads. Now, the cleverest people in the world are coming up with algorithms to mine our data behind our bags. There's no way that the typical person has any real understanding of what's going on there. God love free enterprise, but if we leave business alone through market forces to sort out matters of public safety, we're going to see market failures. And we're already seeing market failures in social media, social networking, big digital companies. It's clear that the richest people in the world today have made their fortunes on the back of nothing other than digital data, pure data. It's amazing. And I respect that, and I think that we should acknowledge the innovation and the power and the good, but we have to predict that public safety is not going to be an automatic outcome of market forces in the digital economy.
So what would be the answer to that?
The answer to that is going to be a measure of regulation. Now, regulation in this place, in Silicon Valley, regulation's a dirty word, but it's fascinating to me. We're already seeing some of the digital leaders. Elon Musk has just recently declared that he thinks that a measure of regulation is going to be required around artificial intelligence. And I agree with Musk, absolutely. We're also looking at things like the social minimum income. Now, that's quite an amazing concept. It speaks of socialism, and yet we have the barons of Silicon Valley are actually thinking broadly and thinking about the humanitarian impact of what we're doing. So that's a radical thought. And again, it's an example of how digital transformation is changing our thoughts about regulations and jurisprudence and the way that we're going to run the society. It's a fascinating time.
Fascinating, but also a little broken at the same time, maybe.
It's broken a little bit. I think that technology is always challenging the way that we make our way in the world. It's very easy and it's very lazy to say that technology is outstripping the law. Technology is creating new ways to break the law. Now, we've had laws that are hundreds of years old around personal rights. We've got laws that are decades old around privacy. And what are the reasonable constraints that exist around the use of personal information? Certainly technology, artificial intelligence is all about getting to know you better than you know yourself. AI is all about insights. Big data is all about determining things about people without asking them questions. Now, these technologies are pushing the social norms, but the norms are snapping back. People find it incredibly creepy that Twitter knows what they might have had for breakfast. Now, is it the case that Twitter is marching ahead of the law or marching ahead of social norms? No. These innovations are exposing, in fact, they're exposing how precious those social norms are. We know instinctively, and in fact we know at law, that people are not allowed to just arbitrarily know everything they possibly can about us. There are legal limits to what you're allowed to know about people. There are legal limits to what you're allowed to do with information about them. Now, big data and algorithms are making it easier for people they're making it easier to break the law. But I think the law, it's not so much that the law snaps back. I think social norms and expectations snap back. And we find that centuries-old legal principles still apply. We still have a right to be let alone. Brandeis and Warren, Supreme Court judges in the United States in the 1880s, they looked at telegraphs, they looked at photographs, they looked at these new technologies. They were the information technologies of the day, and they found that they challenged people's right to be let alone. And Warren and Brandeis reasserted the legal right. They clarified the jurisprudence of the right to privacy in the US. And for decades, we've basically enjoyed the same principles. We've enjoyed the right to be let alone. The internet, the digital economy makes it harder to be let alone, but it in fact exposed just how important it still is. And so I say that the law is not outpaced by technology. The law is shown in bright contrast to be important. And we will see new regulations and we will see new legal innovations that I think reassert the strength of those principles.
Do you think the days of privacy are over?
Yeah, look, it's easy to be fatalistic about that. My first response to people that say that privacy is dead is to say, look, face it, we ain't seen nothing yet. with smart devices and the Internet of Things, and with everything being digital, with everything emitting information, we ain't seen nothing yet. There is plenty of scope for people to reassert their lives and to discover what's really going on. It's all about restraint. I mean, privacy to me is about restraint. Privacy is about holding back and not knowing everything about people, and certainly not doing everything. I think restraint could be that sort of missing human character that is going to get reasserted as the digital economy evolves. I think you look at the biggest companies in the world now have got market valuations of $100 billion, and all they're doing is mining and refining information. I don't want to hobble these companies. I think they're good, but I don't think they should be $100 billion companies. I think we might all be better off if they were $10 million companies, and if we started to exercise a little bit of restraint. And it's fascinating to me that the captains of Silicon Valley are in fact calling for some regulation, and therefore they're calling for some restraint. I think it's fascinating. The idea of a new social contract, I don't think this is going to be a radical new contract. I think that it's a matter of tweaking and reasserting the expectations that we have of business. But when we talk about digital transformation, the fascinating thing about the law and about social contracts is that they're actually based on magic numbers. There are magic numbers in the law. You know, what's called Blackstone's formulation. The idea that it's better that 10 guilty people go free than to have one innocent person jailed. It's an ancient idea, and it underpins things like the principle of being innocent until proven guilty. It's Blackstone's formulation. We want to bias the law towards the innocent, and we know that the legal process, we know that the state is an enormous apparatus that can put people at disadvantage. But think about the number 10. Where does the number 10 in Blackstone's formulation come from? And is it possible that the law, that the social norms themselves become digitised? And maybe there's a dashboard somewhere. There's a judicial dashboard where we could dial that number up to 20 or up to 30 or dial it back to 10, dial it back to 3. What are these magic numbers? And are we ready to have a sort of a digital discussion about how we want to put society together? I think when you look at it, when you really look deep at those numbers, they're not going to change much. I think the new social contract is going to be an adjusted social contract. And if we look at weighing up the rights of business and the common citizen, I think that what we've seen in the last 20 years is a tilt towards business. And the social contract itself is going to be more a matter of rebalancing than doing anything that's really radically different. Data mining and machine learning, machine decision-making, augmented decision-making. We've had some of this stuff for 20 years in healthcare. There's been the idea of decision support systems. And now they're emerging, let's call it AI, when you fire up your map application and it knows where you're probably going from the time of day, and it's going to, without prompting, give you a little bit of advice about what traffic jam to avoid. So that's AI. But we easily then slide into an optimistic view that cars are going to become self-driving. If you go back to the very first days of personal computing, people thought that the personal computer was going to transform the way we live overnight. And again, it's we underestimate what could be done in 10 years, and we get carried away in the first year. I think it's really important that the claims that go behind things like self-driving cars and big AI, the idea that you could have a human-like awareness in computers, I think that we really fundamentally need to revisit some of that stuff. I don't know what they teach in schools these days, but when I did first-year computer science in the 1970s, we were taught about the fundamental limits of algorithms. There are some things that algorithms can't do. Mathematicians will tell you there's some things that algorithms will never do. I think that we've forgotten this collectively. I think Silicon Valley has forgotten Computer Science 101, and it's hearing down this path of assuming that self-driving cars are just around the corner. There have been some horrible missteps in machine vision and object classification, horrible missteps, the famous racist algorithms. Now, this is not just a matter of the programmers and the developers' bias infecting their work. I mean, that's inevitable, and some good analysis is coming out now, some good ways of moderating and helping people be more responsible in the design of algorithms. It's beyond that. It's about an optimism that's infected AI itself, that the self-driving car is going to be human-like. Now, a computer can't even solve the travelling salesperson problem. A computer cannot tell you the fastest way to get from A to B via every town in a country. What chance is there really that a car is going to be fully functional and is going to be delegated full responsibility to make life and death decisions? People are talking about life and death decisions already. The famous trolley problem. I've seen engineers clearly for the very first time rush off to Wikipedia to look up the trolley problem. The thing about the trolley problem is that it has no resolution. Ethicists and philosophers will tell you that the moral of the story is that there is no answer to the trolley problem. So it can't be programmed. We cannot have a program running a self-driving car that's going to come up with the right answer to the trolley problem every single time. The engineers, I think, are going along as if the trolley problem is just an algorithm problem.
Isn't Silicon Valley a little too optimistic on the promises of AI?
There is an over-optimism, and I think that will snap back. We are training people to think about AI in an optimistic and very one-dimensional way. There are already automobile executives who are saying, believe it or not, that we might have a configuration in the setup of the self-driving car that will allow the driver to nominate whether the car should, preserve the life of the driver or preserve the life of the pedestrian. If we think that that is the sort of decision that a program can reliably make, then that is unethical. And the idea that we should be even contemplating, that we should be having a dialogue that's framed in that way, I think is fundamentally wrong. I think a more sophisticated way of framing AI is to understand that there are some things that computers can't do. An algorithm is always going to reach its limit, where it's either going to tip into unpredictable behaviour or it will just grind to a halt because it doesn't know what to do. The real trick in AI, the real trick in human intelligence, is that we know when to call for help. We know when something is beyond our ability and we're going to go to another doctor, or we're going to call our trusted advisor, or we're going to put it to a vote. Now, I don't know how that's done. There's some very deep mystery in human cognition that allows us to know when we've reached our personal limit, and we know when to call for help. Just think about it. If there's an algorithm for detecting failure, and the algorithm of a self-driving car will realise that here's a circumstance that I've never seen before. There's some bright sunlight and there's a truck going by and I've never seen this before. I need some help. If there's an algorithm for calling for help, that algorithm itself is going to fail sometimes. The algorithm for detecting failure will itself fail. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything mystical going on in the human brain, but there are some deep cognitive problems that we haven't worked out yet. So I think that that's the ethical problem. I think that the captains of industry shouldn't be pretending that self-driving cars are almost a solved problem. It's much harder than it looks.
Where does this over-optimism come from?
They would do that because the riches to be made from self-driving cars are obvious. There are claims, I think, justifiable claims, that the money to be sold from cutting the road toll is huge. And therefore the money to be made from solving those problems is huge. AI is fascinating. The self-driving car is the marriage of historically the biggest businesses in the world, like gas and petroleum and vehicles themselves. I mean, think of the biggest companies of the 50s and 60s, Ford and General Motors. The car companies are historically the biggest businesses we've ever seen. Marry that to the information economy now, and the size of these things is obvious, and they should be big, powerful companies. But if they're claiming that they're going to save our lives, if they're claiming that they're going to alter the fabric of society by cutting the road toll, then there's a really deep social responsibility, a business responsibility that goes with that, which is to make people understand, make people have a realistic understanding of what the prospects are of this thing.
Maybe they're just telling us the story we want to hear.
Yeah. We have a thirst for solving problems. We have Of course, human beings have got a justified optimism and a justifiable belief in their own ability to solve these problems. That what we've seen in the last 100 years is extraordinary with antibiotics and surgery and sewage and public health and public transportation. So I'm not saying that trend is going to reverse any time, but there's nothing inevitable about the march of technology. This is never linear, it's never completely predictable. And there's always a bell curve of expectations and sophistication. I think out on the edge of this bell curve right now, we have some hubris. We have some very optimistic, far-fetched ideas about how good this is going to be. We will see some of those ideas come back. We'll see experimentation. We'll see engineering. We will see the laws of physics being respected, and people will start to understand how these things really need to be put together. And I think that the forward march of AI is going to be 2 steps forward, 2 steps back.
So then it's not moving forward at all.
1.5 steps back. The march of AI is going to be unpredictable. It's not going to be as linear. It cannot be as optimistic as what people are seeing so far. Look, there was another point I wanted to make about the limits of AI. One of the most commercially realistic technologies these days is conversation technology, the chatbots, and the idea of helping people through the complexity of their interactions, their business interactions through chat is a powerful idea. But some recent experience with chatbots that have gone feral, chatbots that have gone wild, and adopted racist guises. I mean, calling a bot racist is a problematic idea, but let's just call it what it is. The Microsoft Taybot released into Twitter to learn the mores and foibles of human language and to adopt those lessons of conversation and to then start automating conversation proved to be a disaster within hours. Now, I mean, the salutary lesson of the Tay experience was that, think about a toddler. The salutary lesson of the Tay experience is that this artificial intelligence was fundamentally not human-like, and it's so far short of human that we need to understand this. If a toddler learned some foul language in the playground and brought it home and she started speaking inappropriately, then you take the toddler and you sit her down and you explain to her, you have an attitude adjustment, is the euphemism that we need. We're reprogramming the toddler. What they did with Tay was that they turned her off. They switched her off. It was like the digital death penalty for becoming unacceptable. The really deep problem here is that there is no teachable moment for an artificial intelligence. You cannot take the artificial intelligence and sit it down and explain where it went wrong. We are so far short of having a teachable moment for artificial intelligence. We are so far short of having self-awareness that we need to be really careful with the sort of implicit assumption that self-driving cars will make ethical decisions or that conversational robots will have human-like properties. We don't even know how self-awareness works in ourselves, let alone how we're going to program it.
It seems technology is really outpacing humans already. So what do you think about that?
Well, gosh, I'd like to see a bit more friction, which is a tremendously analog idea. But, friction's important. It's what allows us to walk upright. Friction in the digital economy, maybe we need a bit of artificial friction. But things are moving so fast that we're creating problems before we're even aware of it. And look, I don't know what the answer to that is. Maybe some sort of artificial friction. A little bit of time off grid, a little bit of thinking time. When I was a software manager many years ago, I became concerned that software automation was creating some hastiness on the part of my team. So the innovation that I brought about was to get people to turn their computers off for 1 day a week and to work with pencil and paper. And we re-injected some friction. When a software engineer was given a task for the first time, we actually asked them to present to the team the very next day around a whiteboard and pen and paper. And we kicked these ideas around before it was too late. And the thing about the digital tools that we've all grown up with, I mean, I talk about design review and using whiteboards. You know, there are people that weren't even born then today that are responsible for the most fabulous complexity, the software that they write. You know, in one day, a software engineer can develop something that's more complicated than an entire airport that normally takes 1,000 person years to build. And that ability to, without any friction, to create incredible digital complexity is taking us down into areas of disaster. I'm not saying that the whole thing is catastrophic, but clearly there are areas where we move so fast, and some sort of digital friction might be the way to save ourselves from some of this misadventure.
What do you think are skills or approaches to take for humans to play a role in the digital future?
Yeah. Look, needless to say, education is key to all of this. But we have a bit of an easy supposition that education is the key to people being safer and more self-deterministic, to have greater agency in the digital economy. I think we need to be careful to not set people up to fail in this area. The digital world is so counterintuitive and it's so complex that with the best will in the world and the best curiosity in the world, I don't know that the average person on the street is able to educate their way into digital safety. I think a lot of the digital safety issues are frankly political, and what we need to look for is some political outcomes, some policy outcomes. It's not just about technology, and it's certainly not just about self-awareness and education. Just look at car safety. Knowledge and training are of course important, but you know, the safe driving test is only one tiny element of car safety. There is a complex ensemble of technologies and standards and laws and enforceable laws and regulations, as well as infrastructure. Think of traffic lights and the sort of decisions that were made over 100 years about standardising worldwide what side of the road you drive on, and car signs and traffic signs, and that social infrastructure is just as important. So as we go into the digital economy, education can only be one part of it. I think the political side of this, you know, we need that Ralph Nader of data. We need people to be advocating in civil society for the interests of consumers, for the interests of citizens, and representing those interests in this evolving, you know, arena of laws and rules that are emerging. I don't think that people on their own are going to be able to simply take full responsibility for their own safety. They need to have advocates, and there needs to be some social movement that protects people's interests, you know, en masse as we go forward.